I didn't really believe in any of this stuff. I was very skeptical of anything spiritual. My religious views were agnostic at most, and I didn't think enlightenment was anything more than the fantasies of monks, the power schemes of religious leaders, and the delusions of druggies, con artists, and cult leaders. It was not without consideration that I had reached this view. I had been a spiritual seeker, had practiced meditation and religion, and had many experiences that led me to wonder about the nature of reality and the meaning of life. I was always interested in the big questions, but no matter how astonishing the experience or how deep the question, I could never reach any definite conclusion. Experiences are fleeting, and no matter how seemingly profound, they end. Things return to what seems like normal, and we go on with our lives. All our troubles remain, and we still have to get up the next morning and go to school or go to work or whatever. And the big questions, well, they're really big, and people can spend lifetimes trying to figure them out and never get anywhere. I wasn't any different in this regard. After thousands of years of philosophy, people are still arguing about the same things. There's really no end to it. Like a lot of people, though, I felt like there was something absent from my life, a kind of hole that desperately needed to be filled, a missing thing that I could not place, no matter where I looked. Over time, this developed into deep dissatisfaction, chronic frustration, and eventually depression. And this thing, whatever it was, always seemed just beyond my grasp. It was the only thing that could satisfy me, and it always slipped away, no matter how hard I tried to reach it. And I tried. 1,000 different ways I tried, sometimes knowingly, many times unknowingly, to find this missing thing. At the age of 14, I had a spontaneous out-of-body experience. I was walking home alone one night and stopped in the middle of a field to look up at the stars. I lay down in the grass and gazed up in wonder. After a few moments, I seemed to rise out of my body, floating high into the night sky. Disembodied, I could see all around me, and no matter how high I went, I could still see my body clearly on the ground. By thought, I moved, this way and that, higher and higher. But when I considered that I could go right out into space and beyond, fear gripped me. I wondered what would happen to me, and with that thought, I returned, as if gradually materializing inside my body. It felt strange to move my arms and legs, but slowly I got up. I remember thinking something incredible had happened, but also that I needed to get home or my parents would wonder where I was. A few years later, I found a book about meditation and began a series of experiments. I started with a lot of candle gazing, but soon turned my efforts to quieting all thoughts. Nobody told me this was supposed to be difficult, so I just set about it. And after a while, I had a profound experience. All thought stopped, and seemingly I ceased to exist. And yet, consciousness filled a vast darkness, which I recognized as everything, the unformed totality of the cosmos. I was nowhere, existing and not existing simultaneously, all-knowing and yet knowing nothing. I have no idea how long this experience lasted, but when I came out of it, my normal life and thoughts resumed. I had homework to do, school the next day, and at the time, I suppose I was equally interested in a date with Caitlin Connolly as I was in any sort of cosmic consciousness. In subsequent years, I had many unusual experiences, out-of-body experiences, lucid dreams, death dreams, beatific visions, hypnagogic sleep paralysis, and what I can say now were flashes of transcendental insight. But I could never make sense of it all. These subjective experiences were just phenomena from which no conclusions could be made. While I was filled with an inexpressible longing, I was also filled with deep skepticism. Surely all these phenomena could be explained with a scientific, objective model of reality. What I really longed for was the truth, and time and again I was determined not to be fooled wholeheartedly into some unfounded belief. I continued my experiments with meditation. I read spiritual books. I delved into philosophies and religions. I explored the arts and sciences. I traveled the world in search of myself. I fell into tumultuous romances and endured the deaths of friends and loved ones. I sank into dark depressions and reveled in the chaos of my confusion. I took up and quit a series of careers to pursue my dream of being a writer. I studied and trained in martial arts. I got married and divorced. In short, I got completely lost in life, as we all do. Through it all, I was searching for something I couldn't even really articulate. And I struggled endlessly with the world, with others, and with myself. Ultimately, this drama of my life, all its circumstances, and everything I left out, is really not important, except to say that it was of the utmost importance to my former self. But nothing I ever did or thought or tried relieved the ache in my heart. No relationship, no religion, no philosophy, no idea, no theory, no occupation, no technique. Inwardly, my life began to fall apart. I struggled with depression, and increasingly with a rage unlike anything I had ever known before. When all was said and done, and the trajectory of my life was laid bare before me, it all seemed empty, hollow, worthless. Eventually, I concluded there were no answers to find. There was nothing to do, nowhere to get to, not that would satisfy the insatiable hunger. There was just the humdrum of life and coping with all my accumulated baggage. There was no sense to it all, no meaning to my efforts, no end to my pains, and no escape from the life I'd made for myself. I never seriously considered suicide, mostly because I thought of myself as a stubborn person who would endure to the bitter end, no matter how bitter. But I played with the idea, and I got to a place in life where I understood why some people would go through with it. While all this did not seem to be leading anywhere at the time, other than a sense of drudgery, despair, and self-loathing, something else was really going on. My whole life was converging on a point beyond my imagination. All of this was actually leading to awakening. At the age of 43, after teaching for a number of years, I was working as an educational assistant at a rural high school in Oregon. It was a low-stress job that allowed me time to write and practice martial arts. My various projects were going well, and I had just achieved some small success with a game I was writing. I was driving 50 minutes to and from work on a winding mountain road to proctor state tests, organize advisor groups, supervise hallways, and run study halls. During the day, as time allowed, I would seek refuge in my mind, dreaming up new stories and ideas for games, drawing maps, and pursuing whatever interests arose. I started meditating again, but not because I thought there was anything to find. I just thought it might help with anxiety and depression. I didn't put much effort into it, maybe 15 minutes a day when I could fit it in, but it seemed to make a difference. I thought about traveling again, but not without any hope of finding myself, or anything else for that matter. I started reading some spiritual books again, and I was listening to the wonderful lectures of Alan Watts, but with the purely mundane goal of gaining some helpful perspective. It was like I had come full circle. When I was young, I had found spiritual books both fascinating and frustrating. They seemed to speak of this thing that was missing, and yet there was no way to get there. Now that I had given up finding anything, things started making sense in a surprising way. I began having some unusual thoughts. I realized one day that every imagined limit of myself was completely arbitrary. There were no real boundaries and nothing setting me apart from everything else. And over a number of days, I started feeling very strange. I felt unmoored, as if drifting through reality, wandering through each day. At home, startling thoughts began to express themselves in spontaneous remarks. One day I got out of a long shower and I said to my girlfriend, "I think I'm immortal." For it seemed clear that this body could die, and yet I could not. I felt so odd at work that I began to worry my coworkers would think I was on drugs. Everything seemed still, dreamlike, in some indefinable way. People came and went, scenes changed, days passed, and I was just watching it all happen, unconcerned, completely indifferent. In the midst of all this, I was busy administering state tests and working on my game project. It was April in the Cascades, and the weather was beautiful. I was going out for lunch when I could. I would grab a sandwich and head up to the park on the banks of a river that flowed by the outskirts of town. And there, one day, it just happened. I was eating my sandwich at a picnic table. The river flowed by some 20 feet down the embankment, across a grassy clearing. A cedar tree towered overhead. I watched a crow as I ate. She perched at the far edge of the long table. Others swooped in and landed on the ground nearby. I remember thinking how strange they looked, how familiar, and yet how strange. I finished my sandwich, threw out my trash, and looked up at the trees. I looked up at the trees, and it was like the whole universe turned inside out. That's the best description I've been able to come up with. There was a kind of optical shift, as if I passed through a tunnel, and then there was no inside or outside anymore. And I suddenly realized all at once, like a voice echoing through all creation, this is everything, absolutely everything. Everything that ever was, is, or will be, is right here in front of me. And it had been there all along. Time had fallen away into unreality. And everything in this eternal moment radiated with a brilliance that was shocking to behold. No words can describe my amazement, my elation, my absolute joy. I couldn't believe what was happening, but it was happening. I took a few steps down toward the river, turned around in a circle, and laughed out loud. I laughed and laughed and laughed. It was all so clear now, so absolutely incredible, and yet obvious. Though I could see everything as before, there was no separation between things. There was no near or far. And everywhere I looked, wherever my gaze fell, I recognized it all as nothing other than myself. The whole of creation lay before me, and I was it. As I walked toward the river, I glanced behind me. I was so giddy with delight, so overwhelmed, that I thought my behavior might seem odd to anybody looking on. And while I had the strange sensation that somebody was watching from behind, it also seemed that someone was me. In any case, nobody was there. Standing on the river's bank, I looked out over the rushing water, the still rocks, and the green trees. Clouds drifted in a clear blue sky. The world appeared at once the same and completely transformed. Everything was filled with sublime beauty, an astonishing radiance that could only be described as divine. And for a while, I just stood in awe. And yet, this was the everyday world, the world we are already in. I glanced at my watch, remembering I had to be back at work soon. I looked across the river once more, somehow knowing it would be all right, that this wondrous vision would not vanish, and I headed back to my car. The sensations I was experiencing were so new, so palpably different and disorienting that I didn't even know if I could drive. I got into the car and for a moment just stared at the controls. Then I told myself to be very careful, and I started the engine. The school was not far off, and I got back without issue. The students were already in class, and I wandered the halls looking at everything, confirming in each thing I saw that yes, I am that, and I am that too. It's difficult to describe how incredible and yet how self-evident this is, that what we're seeing is our own being. Despite all this, I found I could function completely normally. I spoke to students, administered tests, and talked with teachers. The rest of the day passed in utter amazement. And as I drove home that evening, down the long, winding road through the mountains, the trees swayed with mysterious intelligence. Every dark corner of my being filled with bliss. And as the beauty of the world flowed around me, I knew my life had changed forever. I would have thought enlightenment to be more like understanding something, and less like being wrapped in a blanket the size of the universe. Yet there I was, swaddled in the cosmos, with no way to account for it. There was no way to understand it with thoughts, just as there is no way to put it into words. I could only surrender, deeper and deeper, until there was nothing left of me. Had there ever been anything at all? Now there was only this awareness and the ebb and flow of bliss. It couldn't last though, right? I mean, I was going to go to sleep and wake up and everything would be back to normal. I would be myself again. How could I not? But that's not what happened. The next day I woke up and looked out the window. A light rain was falling, and I thought, oh, I'm raining. And I realized the whole incredible happening was still happening. And seemingly overnight, all my usual troubling thoughts, my depression, my self-critical ideas, my fear and dread, my self-aggrandizing ambitions, were simply gone. My troubles were over. My search was over. It was a relief beyond imagination. Everything was present in this moment. There was nothing to seek. I couldn't imagine anything other than everything, and it was all right here. In the weeks that followed, it's difficult to remember exactly when everything happened, because time had disappeared. The past and the future no longer seemed real to me. I was an unbound awareness existing in an ever-present now. I cannot begin to tell you how astounding this is. And I considered a lot of things to try to explain my condition. Maybe I had a brain tumor. Maybe I was going crazy. One day I thought maybe I had died. Really died. That's how radically different things were. For a few seconds I got caught in the thought. I tried to think of when it could have happened. How did I die? How did my parents find out? I started to get really scared until I realized these were only thoughts, and instantly they became transparent. I had only scared myself. I didn't have any symptoms of a brain tumor, no headaches, no motor control issues. I was perfectly rational, considering the circumstances. But most clearly, thoughts were only thoughts, and nothing more. For a while, I kept thinking that it must end. Somehow it would end, or I would mess it up. I would get into an argument with my girlfriend, or get frustrated with some student's behavior at work, or get wrapped up in a bunch of writing, and I would think, surely that will be the end of it. But nothing stuck. No thought that came up, no emotion that arose, no event that unfolded. When I tried to look inward, toward that inner life that used to seem so real, that place where all the thoughts and emotions used to accumulate, I couldn't find anything. There was nothing there. There was no me to mess it up. And I couldn't break reality, even if I tried. It's just what is. I returned to the park many times, and surrounded by nature, I marveled at the beauty of the world. I gaped in awe. I wept with joy. I stood dumbfounded before the altar at the edge of infinity. One day, the river was shrouded in mist. A goose appeared, out of the clouds, flying upstream. It flew between the overhanging trees, low over the rushing water, and disappeared in the mist. Beyond the far bank, some clouds cleared, and I watched the trees in the forest. A breeze blew, and something moved amidst the swaying of the high branches. I sensed something so beautiful, so overwhelming that I almost fell down. Tears streamed down my face. It was just unbearable bliss and beauty. It was beyond bliss, beyond indescribable, beyond. And that, whatever you care to call it, is ever present, here and now. One day, I stood by the river and followed the fluttering flight of a butterfly as it made its way across the sunny clearing. Seized by a spontaneous impulse, I ran back along the bank and up a slope to a footbridge that led across the river. I felt like a child again, bursting with the joy of running. I ran out onto the bridge. I ran and ran. The far shore grew larger. The river raged beneath me. And suddenly it seemed I was not only crossing from one bank to another, but I was crossing into another world, a world beyond death. I kept running and running. On the far bank, I walked up a boulder-strewn hillside, and there I lay down on a large mossy rock, amidst wildflowers and tall grasses. I literally felt I was in heaven. We've been here all along, I thought. Heaven is here and now. We just never noticed. As I walked back across the bridge, I stopped in the middle. I stood at the rail and looked downstream. All my life was flowing away from me. I looked down into the roaring river, where the swift water collected into a deep pool. I felt so complete that I thought I could jump into this river right now and die happy. Just disappear into bliss. There was, of course, no point in doing it. This is a world without end. There is no real death. But somehow I knew that my life, the life I had been living, was finished. It had been a wonderful and adventurous life, but that person's life was over. And moved by that which moves everything, I turned from the edge and went on my way.